We would have had a little more time, but we lost a Wednesday, so let's see if we can wrap up Nehemiah. Starting in chapter 8, we'll do some reading. See, I've got it divided up into 5 sections. 1 through 3. James, you want to take 1 through 3? Nehemiah 8. Carolyn, you want to do 4 through 8? Oh, okay. Jim, you want to read 4 through 8? You want to have Bobby do it? Yeah. Okay, Bobby, you want to read? Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 4 through 8. Barbara, you want to read? Yes. All right. I know you can. 9 through 12. How about you, Judy? 13 to 15. And who's behind you guys? Kelly, you want to read? No? Karen, you want to read? No? Jeremy? No? Tiffany would love to read 16 to 18. I got to remember that. Tiffany loves to read. All right, 1 to 3, 4 to 8, 9 to 12, 13 to 15, and 16 to 18. I don't think I left anything out. All right. By the way, let me just give you a little bit of a setting here. Nehemiah has come and brought a large contingency of Israelites back to Jerusalem. What did Nehemiah bring them back to do? Rebuild the wall. The wall. To me, it would have made more sense to build the wall first, but evidently God's a little smarter. What did they rebuild first? The temple. They rebuilt the temple first. God doesn't think like we do. And then, after they had the temple built and things were going pretty good, this guy named Ezra is sent, and he chronicles everything that they did when they came back to rebuild the temple. Who were the two guys in charge when they originally came back to rebuild the temple? Zerubbabel, an odd name, Zerubbabel, and who was the high priest? Joshua. Zerubbabel was the governor, sent back to govern all those Israelites who came back to rebuild the temple. Joshua was the high priest. Later, years later, Ezra came down and he chronicled the whole thing. To chronicle as it is to make a record of it. Now, Ezra is here. 14 years after Ezra is on the scene, Nehemiah comes down. So there's kind of a chronology. So Nehemiah's come down. They've worked on the wall, built it up, and they're really getting things going now. Okay, chapter 8, verse 1.
Ezra the scribe stood at a wooden podium which they had made for the purpose, and beside him stood Mattathiah, Shimon, Ananiah, Uriah, Hilkiah. I'm not sure if this is
Dude, you're doing great. Yeah.
And Messiah on his right hand, and Pedaiah, Mishael, Malchikah, Asham, Hashbaddanah. What would they name their kids then? Zechariah and Meshullam on his left hand. Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was standing above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. Then Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, while lifting up their hands. When they bowed low and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground, also Jeshua, Bani, Sherebiah, Jamin, Akiba, Shabali, Hodiah, and all those other names I read before. Explained the law to the people while the people remained in their place. They read from the book from the law of God, translating to give the sense so that they understood the reading.
Amen.
I'm glad you got that.
Nehemiah, which the Tashara and Ezra, the priest, the scribe, and the Levites that taught the people, said unto all the people, This day is holy unto the Lord your God. Mourn not, nor weep, for all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Then he said unto them, Go your way, eat the fat, and drink the sweet, and send portions unto them, for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto our Lord, neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So the Levites still at the people, saying, Hold your peace, for the day is holy, neither be ye grieved. For all the people went their way to eat and to drink and to send portions and to make great merit, because they had understood the words that were declared unto them.
And on the second day were gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests and the Levites under Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. And they that should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, Go forth unto the mount, and fetch olive branches, and pine branches, and myrtle branches, and palm branches, and branches of thick trees to make booths, as it is written.
So the people went out and brought them and made booths for themselves, each on his roof, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of God, and in the square at their water gate, and in the square at the gate of Ephraim. The entire assembly of those who had returned from the captivity made booths and lived in them. The sons of Israel had indeed not done so from the days of Joshua the son of Nun to that day, and there was great rejoicing. He read from the book of the law of God daily, from the first day to the last day. And they celebrated the feast 7 days. And on the 8th day there was a solemn assembly according to the ordinance.
Anything impress you in this reading? Yeah, really. Next time we have a reading with a lot of difficult names, we know who to give it to. So she'll either get them read or she'll say, all those other guys. Good job. What is there in this that impresses you? Does anything stand out?
Well, I don't know that this is what you're looking for, but what got me at the end is that they were basically camping out, and every time they're spending it, it's just camp out to be out, and, like a celebration.
Right, yeah.
Like that. I thought that was cool.
Something different. Bobby?
I was impressed with the fact that he told them to eat the fat.
Yeah.
That was always reserved for God.
Okay.
In their sacrifices.
Yeah.
Go eat the fat, drink the sweet.
Yeah.
Use that, like I said, they was using it for the sacrificial part.
Another part of the celebratory nature of what they were doing. I saw a hand in the back. Was that Mike?
You're looking for, but
Well, now you all are assuming I'm looking for something. I just asked, was there anything in this that impressed you? Well, so far, it's been great.
in verse 2, I guess it is, it says that the assembly was made up of men and women, and all who were able to understand.
Yes.
Men and women, and who else? I mean, that kind of covers the warp, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, maybe there were some younger people there who weren't yet women, weren't yet children, but they were old enough to understand, and so they were there. I don't know. Might have been, but they would have been either men or women, probably. Most foreigners I have met, and I've done some traveling, they either fall into the category of men or women. Yes, somewhere in between. Now, New York City, there have been some questionable folks, but nothing against New York City. Actually, New York wasn't as strange as L.A. So, okay. So we just keep right on going. It just depends on where you have been. What else? This is all great, and I say, yeah, amen to it. James and then Billy. That's right. Celebration for everybody, not just those who have it. Billy and then Trish. Did you have any? Okay.
We have authorization for a wooden pulpit.
All right, there's your
Wooden
authorization.
pulpit.
A wooden pulpit. Now, a metal one won't do. That's progressive and liberal. We won't have a metal pulpit. What's that? Yes, because your fly might not be where it needs to be. Believe me. Trish.
For the word, and when it was read, they're like, okay, yeah, let's go do it. We don't see where they were arguing or going, do we have to do all of that? They were just like, yeah, let's go.
Was this the first time that they heard the law or knew the law since they've been back?
You see, this is a question for me because I know they had a familiarity with the way of God while they were in captivity. You remember what Daniel did when he was in captivity? He opened his window 3 times a day and he prayed towards Jerusalem. He knew of God. The 3 brothers, I want to say Ahab the Arab and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were so committed to God. They knew enough about God to be so committed to him that they were willing to give their lives. And they said, he'll either save us or they won't, but we're still not going to bow down to your idol God. So there was a knowledge of God among them. God had sent Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a prophet among the exiles. But how much of the actual word they had to read, apparently there wasn't as much as we might like to think there was. Because these people, when they hear this, it is as if, Joe is pointing out, I think, haven't heard this before. What was their response? They were eager. It also says they wept. Why would they weep? Now, there could be a number of reasons, but it appears that they were weeping as if to mourn, because that's what Nehemiah says. That's what he addresses in verse 9. He said, this day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep, for all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law. It may well be that they knew their sins, and even while in captivity, they weren't living as morally and godly as they should have. And so now they know this, and they're crying about it. Steve.
The priest is the one that handles the law, right?
Right?
Where do you suppose it would have been kept before they were taken into captivity?
There were copies of the law in the temple.
In the temple.
Right.
Wasn't everything taken out when Nebuchadnezzar came? Did he take everything out of the temple?
There were some that were what's the word? Hidden away, snuck away. Well, for example, the caves, Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden.
Correct, but it's not like that they had a temple that they could go worship and hear the law read when
That's
they were
right.
in captivity.
That's right.
And they had been there 70 years, so that was at least a generation or so.
Right.
So yes, they wept because the law showed them what they should have been doing and they weren't doing.
There almost certainly was a knowledge of God that unified them as a people. Otherwise, I don't know that either Zerubbabel or Nehemiah could have put together thousands of people like they did to go back. Go back for what? We got it better here in Babylon than we ever, whatever that God was. No, that's what wasn't their attitude. Just lay out, let's go back. Let's go back and rebuild. Let's rebuild the temple. Let's rebuild the wall. Even though they faced opposition for both of those rebuilding projects, they stayed faithful. They held on to their weapons. They were a people who were a nation. Even though they didn't know everything from the law, they were committed to whatever it was that God was teaching. Bob, I don't think I missed anybody, did I? Okay, Bob.
Most was the fact that the Festival of the Booths was last celebrated with Joshua, which
Right.
means none of the judges Saul, David, Solomon, or any of the kings with the divided kingdom celebrated the Festival of the Booths.
Wow.
It was lost
Hundreds of years.
thousands of years before.
And I think about this when I read things like that. We really try hard in the Lord's church to get things right. Lord's Supper, only on the first day of the week, because that's what we're convinced the Scriptures teach. And it doesn't even say you must have the Lord's Supper on the first day. We just have an example of it, that they gathered on the first day of the week to break bread. And we follow that example because we don't have anything else. And to choose anything else is to go in some direction other than what the Word has led us. Now, if you start talking to people in denominations, you can have it any time you want. And you don't have to have unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. Why do we use unleavened bread and fruit of the vine? That's what we know was used during the Lord's Supper, so we stay with that. I'm sure I've told you when we were in Denver, there was a Lutheran congregation that advertised for their college group, come for the Lord's Supper on Sunday. It's going to consist of pizza and beer. And that was what they were doing with the Lord's Supper. So you've got all these different ideas, but when Ezra opens the book, by the way, what do the people do? They stand up. And how long did they stand up? So you're talking about some respect for this word. Even though they don't know what's in it, they know this is of God. We're going to respect this. They stand up and they listen to it all day long. Don? Yeah.
I went, it's the first time I had wine service, and they diluted the wine 1/3 to symbolize the bleeding out of Jesus. Blood mixed with water. And that's the way they did it.
Interesting. There really are all kinds of ideas about how to do things. If you don't think so, just get on Facebook and throw out something religious and see what you get. Bobby?
With this law, they had been handing down traditionally,
Yes.
all the way through. So they had some idea of what was in the law, but all of a sudden, it's like we've got the whole thing again, which they had to have. And so they were tears of grief. I think there were also tears, the fact that, it's finally back here. Kind of like we do sometimes when we get something that we weren't expecting, and the tears just roll. We can't control it. It was interesting. He says, "Be still."
Right.
This is a celebration, but be still.
Don't hoot and holler and jump for joy. It's a solemn occasion, but it's a time for celebration. Think about what's going on. They've been in captivity in a foreign nation for 70 years. Now a contingent has come back and they've rebuilt the temple. The guys who come back to rebuild the wall, they're looking, well, look, man, there's the temple. And so they get started on the wall. They get that wall rebuilt, and it's like, wow, look, everything's coming together. Just like our saying in our vernacular, isn't it great when a plan comes together? That's what's happening with them. And they had this celebration. We're going to read about this. Well, maybe we won't have time to read about it tonight, but you can read about it yourself in, chapter 12. And essentially what they do is, what Nehemiah does, he and Ezra take the leadership. They form two huge choirs of singers, and with those singers, they've got musicians playing on trumpets, lyres, psalteries, all kinds of things. And one group comes up on the wall, and they go to the left, and the other group comes up on top of the wall, and they go to the right. Because we're not just talking about a brick wall that's just a wall. We're talking about a wall that on top of that wall is a rampart where you get up there and you move, you can walk. It's wide enough for that. That's how you fought a war. You got up there and you had room to move and get troops shuffled back and forth and equipment. So half of them went to the right, half of them went to the left, and they started at the south end of the wall, and they went around the sides, and they met up at the top. That's how they dedicated the wall. A really neat thing to visualize in your mind. And I don't remember why I'm talking about this now. But this is the kind of stuff that's going on. It's emotional. Not only do they see the temple rebuilt and the wall rebuilt, and they know we've been part of this, they also know now we're reading the law and we're finding out, oh, this isn't what we've done. We've got some changes to make, and they're willing to make it. They stand up for the reading of the law, hours, and they listen to it. This is really a neat thing to read about. Yes?
That reminds me over in Costa Rica, in the mission work, the little children would bring little flat rocks. We had Bible classes outside, and the little children would come by the droves, and they'd have a little block of wood or they'd have a rock, and as long as you'd talk, those children would sit there. And they would sit there from 9:30 to 12, and you wouldn't hear a peep out of them as long as you was teaching them.
And they brought the rocks and the wood to sit on. That was their chair.
Missionary work, lots of times, people didn't have a home like we have. They would have a piece of cardboard leaning up, and they had their little plot, about a 10-foot plot, marked off with rocks. And when you went to talk to them, you either stood up or you sat on a rock.
None of these folding chairs from Walmart, huh?
That is dedication.
I think about Haiti. I wish I could transport everybody to Haiti for just 10 minutes. Just go down there and see the poverty, and see the people, and get kind of a flavor for what it's like to have nothing. And these little children come, and one of the reasons they come is they're hopeful that they'll get something to eat while they're there. And they come, and they're all just as skinny as a rail, but they're clean. They're all clean, and they're well-mannered. You say, come over here and sit down, and they can't even speak English, but they'll go over there and sit down because you know you're motioning, and you're the authority for them, and they listen, they mind. It's a different culture. Here, it gets to be about 25 minutes into the sermon, and you see people going, even when I preach. Yeah. No, it's not bad, but I know I'm the same way. It's like, okay, we got a schedule to keep here, and we got so much time allotted for this and so much time allotted for that. They weren't worried about a clock. They were worried that they hadn't done the will of God. And so they were mourning and weeping over that. And Nehemiah says, no, none of this. Listen, this is a time to celebrate. We're getting back to this. Mike?
It hadn't been that many years ago that here in the United States, the church would have a 2-week, what's the word I'm looking for?
Meeting, gospel meeting.
Yeah, gospel meeting.
Revival.
And, the seats were filled every night.
We just get used to certain things. That's what happens to us. We're just like Pavlov's dog. We get accustomed to whatever it is we're used to. And these people were experiencing something they had never experienced before in their lives. And it's bringing them back to God. And they were hungry and they were thirsty for that. And it's just fantastic to read about it. We don't have a whole lot of time, and we've got several more chapters to go. I want you to look at chapter 9, the first part of it. And it says, chapter 9, now on the 24th day of this month, the sons of Israel assembled with fasting and sackcloth and with dirt upon them. Okay, now we're going to give some time to fasting and mourning. And it says, the descendants of Israel separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. This is a common element. You may not have noticed it so many times in Nehemiah, but if you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, and if you also read about Daniel, when Daniel talks about the return, this is what these guys do. they make a confession, not of their own personal sins, but, oh Lord, our nation has sinned before you. There was a great national view, national worldview, a national conscience, and these guys were cognizant of that, and they were continually confessing the sins of the nation before God. Don?
Interesting thing, when you said the sons of Israel, Israel was already gone into Assyria. All that was left was Benjamin and Judah. So did the sons of Israel come down?
No, I mean, these guys were sons of Israel as well. Israel, Jacob had his name changed to Israel. Jacob had the 12 sons. When the nation split, there was Saul and then David and then Solomon. For 120 years, the nation was united under those three kings. But Saul had taxed the people heavily, and so when Solomon had taxed the people heavily, and when Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne, and he decided, I'm going to tax them even worse. And so his taxive oppression on the people was so great that they rebelled. 10 tribes went to the north, and they were called Israel. Benjamin and Judah stayed together, and they came to be known as Judah. They were all Israelites, but they just were called, Israel was, the 10 northern tribes is what the name took there, and then the southern tribe was called Judah. But they were all Israel. They were sons of Israel, sons of Jacob. So they're Israelites. What were we talking about? That's pretty much the way it is. And even when you read about individual families in the Old Covenant, hardly any of those families were without their appropriate amounts of dysfunction. They're just like people today, not really much different. When they get down to verse 5, what you'll see in verses 5 and following is a song. This is a song of praise and exaltation, and it just goes on through this whole chapter. And you see confession in verse 16, that they come back to that theme. But they, our fathers, acted arrogantly. They became stubborn and would not listen to your commandments. They refused to listen, did not remember your wondrous deeds which you had performed among them. And then again in verse 26, but they became disobedient, rebelled against you, and cast your law behind their backs, and killed your prophets who had admonished them. 28, but as soon as they had rest, they did evil again before you. Therefore you abandoned them to the hand of their enemies, so that they ruled over them. Again, in verse 33, however, you are just in all that has come upon us, for you have dealt faithfully, but we have acted wickedly. Our kings, our leaders, our priests, and our fathers have not kept your law. This was their mindset. This was their thinking. As a nation, we've sinned. We've departed from what you wanted us to do, and we confess that. And because of that spirit, they were brought back. There are records in chapter 10. Let's see. We talked about chapter 12 to some degree and the dedication of the wall. I'll tell you what, let's go to, before our time is gone, let's go to chapter 13. That's the last chapter, and do some reading here. Let's see. Boyd, you want to read the first 3 verses? Oh, you had your jaw worked on. Okay. Steve, you want to read it? Chapter 13, 1 through 3.
Read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it they found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, because they did not meet the Israelites with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent.
Okay. What's happening here? They're picking up on details of the law. And they're not just reading over it and saying, well, that's nice. We just read the law. They're saying, wait a minute, have we done that? And they hadn't done that. So what'd they do? They did it. They did it. Now, we read this today, and I think, oh, okay, they just told all the foreigners, okay, you guys got to get out. Do you ever read something like this and wonder, how difficult was that? Was there any conflict? Was there any opposition? Was there anybody saying, you guys are a bunch of legalists? They couldn't call them Pharisees because the Pharisee hadn't come into being, but that's what you'll be called today if you tell people, well, you actually need to do what the Bible says. And that's what these guys were trying to do. They weren't trying to be mean, they were trying to obey. Mike?
In my Bible, whenever there's a statement like this, it was found in the Word of God that there's a reference to where it is found.
Yes.
And on this particular one, there is no reference.
I've got one in Deuteronomy 23. Let's see if that's it. I remember reading about this, not from Nehemiah, but from the record of it actually happening. Okay, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Okay, there it is. They read this, and they said, oh, wait a minute. We haven't done that. And so they did it. Probably everybody knew, and there was not a whole lot of problem with that or issue with that. We hadn't read it in this, but there were times when they would look especially for Levites, and it says their names were not found, and so they were not considered to do the work.
23, it says, "You shall not despise the Edomites, for they are your younger brothers."
Okay. At any rate, we don't really have much information about that. We just know that they did it. That's what we're told. Yes?
Another question. Verse 1, in this translation it says, on that day the book of Moses was read. That makes it sound like it was one book, not several, as we know it today. Is that the way it would have been?
I'm not sure how they had it recorded. We know they used scrolls rather than books like we talk about. And we see the word book. What that really means is the collection of the writing.
The law, that would make sense that they were referring to the law, no matter how many, like the first 5 books.
Right.
It was the book of Moses. He's the one that recorded those 5 books.
If you remember in Luke chapter 16, when the rich man was trying to talk Abraham into sending Lazarus back because he had 5 brothers, Abraham responded, this is chapter 16 of Luke and verse 31, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded even if someone rises from the dead." Now, when he says Moses, who's he talking about? Or what's he talking about? He's talking about those first 5 books, the Torah, the Pentateuch, we call it, because we understand it's 5 books. So, Mike, as to your question, is there one scroll, or is it just a figurative reference to the one book being the 5 that Moses wrote? I'm not sure. But we know it was a book of Moses, and we know the references to Deuteronomy. So we know at least Deuteronomy is in view. Good question. Anything else? All right.
Law or obey the commandments. So to me, it makes common sense that it would be referring to the law when he says the book. Moses, the book.
And they still consider Genesis through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all 5 of those books are considered the law. Now, when you look at Genesis it doesn't look like Genesis is written out as a law. Genesis is written out more as a narrative, but they consider that part of the law. And so they use what was in Genesis as law. For example, when Jesus was asked a question about divorce in Matthew 19, what did he refer to? He went back to Genesis and he said, this is the way it was from the beginning. So what he's delivering to them, what he's teaching them is that this record from Genesis has the force of law. This is God's will. This is his design. This is the way it's supposed to be done. What about divorce? That's not the way it was from the beginning. Well, how do you know that? That's not written in Deuteronomy, no, but it's recorded in Genesis, how God created things and how he wanted things, and so that's the law. So why did Moses give a writing of divorcement? Well, because your hearts were hard. So Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. And then later on, guys took all kinds of wives. How many wives did David have when he committed fornication with Bathsheba? He had 7. He already had 7 wives. Well, I'm moving on from that remark, Joe. I'm going to let you stand alone. Well, I know what you mean. When you've got one as good as Jennifer, that is all you need. You just can't improve on perfection. What's that? I don't know. Yeah, you've got to be fast on your feet up here, man. It's dangerous. All right, verse 4. What's happening in verse 4? Eliashib is a guy who is a priest, and he's got a relative. His name is Tobiah, and he fixes up a place in the temple for Tobiah. When Nehemiah gets there and finds this out, look at verse 8. I threw all of Tobiah's household goods out of that room. I gave an order and they cleansed the rooms. I returned there with the utensils of the house of God, with the grain offerings and the frankincense. Chapter 8, we're reading about people's commitment and dedication to the law. They stand up, they hear it read, they find out they haven't done it, they're weeping. And yet here's a priest who is using the temple for his own family, personal benefit. So it's just like today. You got a general sense of dedication and commitment, but you've also got a few people who are willing to push the limits and do things they shouldn't be doing. And so Nehemiah, as a leader, has to always be taking things in hand. That's not the last thing. It says in verse 10, he discovered that the portions of the Levites had not been given them. Who were the Levites? The Levites were the priestly tribe who took care of the tabernacle and later took care of the temple. That was their job. And the tithes that were brought were for the benefit of them, because the Levites, the tribe of Levi, did not get what? They did not get a land inheritance. And so that was committed in the law, stipulated in the law to be their inheritance. In verses 15 through 20, it talks about the restoration of the Sabbath, and people weren't honoring the Sabbath, and so he took stringent measures to honor the Sabbath. And there were foreigners who were camping outside the wall during the Sabbath so they could come in the next day, and he hollered over and said, get out, leave. If you don't, I'm coming out there and I'm going to force you to leave. Because this isn't about you guys waiting around to make some money when the Sabbath is over. We're going to honor the Sabbath and really honor the Sabbath. And then look at verse 23. This is just fascinating to me. In those days I saw that the Jews had married women from Ashdod and Ammon and Moab. As for their children, half spoke in the language of Ashdod, and none of them was able to speak in the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. So I contended with them and cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God. Can you imagine? Woo! That Nehemiah, he had he was ready to do what needed to be done to bring things back into order. He said, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take of their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin regarding these things? Now, see how he's applying Scripture? He reads about Solomon. He says, Solomon sinned with regard to this, so we know not to do that. Among the nations there was no king like him, and he was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused even him to sin. Do we then hear about you, that you have committed all this great evil by acting unfaithfully against our God, by marrying foreign women? If you read the Bible carefully, God will show you through it how to interpret the Bible and how to apply the Scriptures. Nehemiah reads what happened to Solomon, and he comes up, okay, here's the conclusion. Don't be doing what Solomon did. When you read something that's in the Bible, ask yourself, why did God have this put in there? When you think about it, that's a pretty small collection of writings to be the Word of God. You look at other religious books, and there's a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff because, well, just like our national laws. Every time you've got a law, somebody says, well, I'm going to interpret it this way. Oh, we've got to have another law to show people how to interpret that law, and it just keeps going and going and going. God says, I'm not doing that. I'm giving you this, and you better get it right. It's not about being legalistic. It's about wanting to know what I'm giving you, and you can know if you study this book. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that does not need to be ashamed. That's it, rightly dividing the word of truth. Carolyn?
Probably a silly question, but could the Levites not ever own land?
No.
They weren't supposed to get a land inheritance. Now, whether or not they could buy land, that might have been something that they were allowed. I don't know how to answer that. What's that? That was the idea.
They
Provided for you.
they got their own cities.
I was going to say, they gave the city.
They got the cities of refuge.
Right.
So they would have had homes there.
Probably have some trailer parks here and there.
Yeah. No tornadoes, so that's
Keep
okay.
the tornadoes away from Jerusalem. I still think that's a good plan. Just put trailer parks all around the city and let the tornadoes be drawn out there to them anyway. So, that's the second bell, isn't it? Well, what's that? Saved by the bell. I didn't say people need to live in them. I just